Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, the listening public, especially those from Guyana and the Guyana diaspora, among others. The looming regional and presidential elections, which will be held May 11, 2015 in Guyana, has been abuzz with a mixture of apprehension, curiosity, and ethnic tensions, as the two major contending parties, the PPP/Civic and the PNC, or so I thought, ranted their testy and combative campaigns to influence the Guyanese electorate and the Guyanese diaspora. This three-part article has been intended to capture the essence of the history and track record of both parties, so as to allow the relevant listening public to be in a more informed position when exercising its franchise to vote, a vote that will be decisive in allowing the political and economic progress from 1992 to the present time to continue unabated in our country, a country that had been politically and economically assaulted to its demise by the PNC between 1964 and 1992. The People's Progressive Party made its debut on the Guyanese political landscape on the 1st of January 1950 under the leadership of the iconic political visionary Dr. Chetty Jagan, accompanied by his wife, Mrs. Janet Jagan, and Mr. Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham, among others. It started out as a multiracial, multi-ethnic, and all-inclusive political party, and it continued vigorously to this day to advocate, promote, and solidify those ideals that have been indelibly etched in its founding manifesto. And truly so. In the early 50s, the PPP created a united front, merged most of the people from different ethnic background to agitate for political independence. This state of affairs inevitably echoed a lurking dread on the British government, which strongly believed that Dr. Chetty Jagan had a predisposition to communism and was sowing the seed of a red conspiracy. And if Guyana were to be given independence under the PPP, it would be transformed into a communist state, which would not fit well within the ideological framework of the British Empire. In 1953, that state of affairs was further aggravated when the PPP won 18 out of 24 elected seats in the general election. This prompted the British government to embark on its policy of divide and rule. To achieve that, it decided to prey upon anyone who is power-hungry, racial, and competent, and who had the potential and willingness to create a racial and ethnic divide that would fragment and cripple the united front amassed by the PPP. The British government found those attributes to be alive and well in Mr. L.F.S. Burnham, who was an Afro-Guyanese, a distinguished British barrister at law, and the functioning Minister of Education of the PPP. Mr. Burnham exploited that opportunity and fashioned it to give vent to his racist, power-hungry, opportunistic, and dictatorial tendencies. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the PNC had been founded in racism and ethnic divide. The Robertson Commission, which was appointed by the British government, orchestrated a plan to split the PPP by touting opportunistic and venal members like Burnham, who formally opted to be leader or nothing in the PPP, evidence of his power hungriness, to defect from the PPP. To execute this plan, Mr. L.F.S. Burnham parted from the PPP in 1955 and formed the People's National Congress, acronym PNC, in 1957, which was designed to create, promote, and perpetuate racism and ethnic divide. purposely to thwart the races and fragment the united front achieved by the PPP in 1953, all to the favor and benefit of the British colonialists to frustrate and derail the independence movement that was kick-started by the PPP. However, efforts by the PNC and other political factions to fragment the races was arguably blunted, as the PPP won the general elections in 1957 and again in 1961, at which time Dr. Cherry Jagan became the Premier of British Guiana, now known as Guyana. So unlike the PPP, the PNC was founded on racism and ethnicity and continue as such to this day, as the PPP remained proactive in its bid to unite the races and pursue the common good for all Guyanese. One could argue, however, that the racist initiative adopted and carried out by the PNC before Guyana's independence in 1966 was tactical and designed to bolster the support, cooperation, and connivance of the British colonialists to remove the PPP. Nonetheless, that reasoning did not stand the test of time, as racism and ethnic divide continue to deepen and became more pronounced under the PNC, even after independence in 1966. Time had conclusively verified that racism was a calculated policy of the PNC to be reckoned with. It is worthy to note that it had been the PNC who exploited the initiative to introduce racism and ethnicity in Guyana. Prior to that, ladies and gentlemen, racial, ethnic, and cultural harmony had permeated every sector of the Guyanese society, so much so that massive trust and friendliness abound among the races as they go about their daily routine and mingle with each other. Political and racial unrest engineered by the PNC. Between 1961 and 1964, the PNC aligned with other political factions, the UF, which is the United Force, and the TUC, among others, to depose the PPP from office, notwithstanding the fact that the PPP had been making progress in different areas. Multiple agricultural projects were in the making, which includes the Blackbush Polder and the Tabacuman Land Development Scheme, nationalization of the Canadian Electric Company. Advances were made in primary and secondary education. 51 church-controlled schools were taken over by the state. Prior to that, it was required of you to become a Christian, to be a teacher, if all other criteria were met. Actually, that was one of the major reasons why some members of non-Christian religions and sects ended up being Christians, especially people in the Madras religion. Furthermore, the University of Guyana had been established in 1963 by the PPP, among other projects. In February of 1962, the ethnic and racial animosity started to get even more frosty, as a sentiment echoed by those in opposition to the PPP. Rioters and arsonists took to the streets of Georgetown in collusion with the UF on February 16, 1962, and looted and burned mostly East Indian-owned businesses. Hooliganism, thuggery, and looting became commonplace as it spread to outlying regions like Wismar, Mackenzie, Christiansburg, Buxton, etc. Hundreds of people were injured, while some lost their lives, were beaten, slaughtered, burnt, and raped. The police were unable to immobilize the uprising. One police superintendent, Mr. Ian MacLeod, was shot to death, while 39 others were wounded. the situation visibly spiraled out of control as British troops, British soldiers who were stationed in Guyana were alerted to contain the riot. Before it was contained, the electricity plant, the waterworks, Parliament building, Premier Chadijagan's residence were firebombed, among others. All this were mobilized and carried out by the PNC and its loyalists, and nakedly supported by the United States Central Intelligence Agency, which is the CIA, and the British intelligence, with the objective of subverting the PPP government and deepening the racial chasm initiated by the PNC. For more on this, please refer to United States declassified documents of British Guyana, 1964 to 1968. Fortunately, and to the amazement of its opponents, the PPP survived this endeavor to depose it. Ladies and gentlemen, you the listening public, that day was dubbed Black Friday and would endure in infamy. Like most people, I find it difficult to distance myself from it, as the depraved lawlessness it trumpeted continued to echo and linger in the body politics of Guyana. Meanwhile, the PNC continued relentlessly to perpetrate attacks on the PPP and its supporters. During 1963 and 1964, Dr. Jagan, in an effort to temper the violence and dampen the lawlessness, invited the PNC to table proposals for a coalition government with an equal number of ministries. As anticipated, Mr. Barnum declined to engage in any such discussion as the violence continued. At least 32 leading PPP activists were arrested and locked up, a move that was designed to impair and choke the ability of the PPP government to function. Moreover, the police seized a catch of weapons at the residence of Mr. Emmanuel Farbane, a PNC activist. Weapons that were intended to be used to injure and murder PPP activists and others. This arrest caused the violence to subside. Despite that, however, in December 7, 1964 general elections, the PPP secured a plurality of the votes, 46%, the PNC 41%, the UF 12%. Pursuant to these results, political orthodoxy and parliamentary tradition had it that Dr. Jagan would have been asked to form his government. Instead, the then governor, Sir Richard Luke, brought into focus the political device of proportional representation, acronym PR, which legitimized a coalition between the PNC and the UF, purposely to depose the PPP from office. That was done. The PPP was ousted, and the PNC and UF coalition was eased into office. The UF would later be booted out of the coalition by the PNC, who will then exercise full and unconditional power in office. In simple terms, you the reading public, you the listening public, the political and economic death warrant against most Guyanese had now been signed and affirmed by the PNC. The next part will deal with the execution and political and economic death warrant. The execution of the economic and political death warrant against most Guyanese. That period would entail 1964 to 1962.